Gonna bake some pastries this morning. I grabbed the wrong rack without looking. That's our sandwich rack. It's one of those mornings, just 30 minutes ago, everything seemed smoother than smooth. And yet, we're gonna have an odd one, mainly due to the fact that we are a group of people that work together in a tight team. Whether there's one of us in a garage, 4 of us in a garage, or 25 of us in a production bakery, a team only functions when it's complete. But when it comes to work that's dependent on human hands, there's only so much that you can do in absence. You've got to move people around and you got to get stuff done. Hot open. So these are our pastries for the front of house today. Meanwhile, we already have pastries that were baked just a little while ago, loaded up for market. So amongst these, I've got some danishes, and they don't get fully baked on this first run of the oven. And oddly, I decided to leave one tray of them behind. Fortunately, I just loaded the oven, so not a whole lot of risk here. Had this happen just like 5 minutes later, and if I opened up this oven 5 minutes in, then the result would be all of the pastries collapsing. It takes a certain type of person to work in this kind of an industry. There's just a million variables. These days, it's more about dealing with the circumstances as they arise and just making the best decision that we can. So I'm gonna bake the baguettes. These are very soft today. Gonna have to be very careful with them because with how soft this dough is today, I could really damage it. So the timer here is for the danishes to pull out the par-baked danishes, which will then get filled, then put back in the oven to finish and set the curd. I'm looking with my eyes and checking the color from here, and I see pastries that are still pretty white. So let's see what we can get done and set a timer for 2 minutes. Try to get a few more baguettes gently placed in that 2 minutes, just bouncing between the ovens. So we're currently looking to continue to build our team. It's exciting times for us. We're finally going to empty the garage. We designed our satellite bakery to accommodate that equipment. It will be open within the next few months. So as a result, we're looking for more team members. So now I have to time this correctly. I've got these baguettes up here. I really don't want to exceed this point in the belt, because otherwise they will literally fall out of the oven. Since I have the other oven going, these can rest here for a moment before loading, so I can score them. There's my timer. Okay. Immediately, I'm comforted just by the color of the pastry. And now I'm just going to pull out the trays of danishes and throw them here on the table where they're gonna get filled. So they have a lighter golden brown. The rest of these need to bake the rest of the way. So I'm now moving my oven to a manual mode. So the next step with these danishes will be to remove the ramekins, fill the danishes, then put them back in the oven and let them bake until the lemon curd sets at 160 degrees. That will ensure that both products, the danishes themselves and the lemon curd, end at the right time for both halves. At the very least here, I can step over and bake some baguettes. These are not refrigerated at the moment. They're definitely of an ambient quality, and so it makes scoring them a bit more challenging. I'll move over there next. That little indicator was my 1 minute warning on the other pastry oven. So I've essentially got less than a minute now to get these guys started. Looks like I got this pretty spot on. I'm happy with the color of these pastries. So you have a really nice golden brown color, great expansion with all the different varieties. I have the pain au chocolat here. So quite happy with this bake. I have one more round of pastry to bake, so I'll get that one going. So our braids, before they actually get baked, we then cut them up to size. One of the reasons I love that product is, in theory, I can cut it to any size I want at the end. And so, like, let's say you're having a big event that we're making some sort of pastries for. We could cut it really small. You could have more like taster pieces. I could have easily fit all these pastries on the previous round of baking, but I chose to split them up because we have the time as far as when the store opens. And that allowed a few of them to give a little bit more time in the proofer. There's actually product here on this sheet tray. If I pull one of these up, you can see there's a piece of parchment and then the palmiers, which they're like a crispy croissant cookie. And so they're going to bake like the Danishes for about 8 minutes. Then this will get pulled off and then they'll get to finish. But the weight of this tray keeps them flat and makes them expand outward. Set a timer for 8 minutes. Just checking out these baguettes as they go. But I'm maintaining that pastry bake and doing the first two here as inclusion bins. So we're scaling out less than a full bin's worth. This is our base country sourdough. And I could reinvent the wheel with a slightly different formula of flour, water, and salt for the olive bread or for the multi-grain, or I can find a master recipe that can serve 3 or 4 purposes all in itself. So I know that this recipe is solid enough that if I add the olives in it, fold them in, do the rest of the process the same, that I'm gonna get a really beautiful bread. Same with the seeded multigrain. It doesn't always work. You can't have one dough for everything you may wanna make, but you don't have to have a different formula, base formula for every single bread that you make. That's my 1 minute timer on the oven, so I gotta be conscious of that. I can probably scale 1 bin's worth and then move over there. This is now straight country sourdough, so it's gonna be a full bin's worth. The tare function on this scale doesn't work, so every time you want to tare it, you gotta turn it off and turn it on, wait 10 seconds, such is life. It breaks a lot, and we're not really experts at fixing that function. The scale itself is expensive, and so it's better to just deal with that minor inconvenience than to replace a $400 scale all the time. Now my timer's off. Now I'm gonna pop these back in and let them finish out. 10 more minutes should bring everything to completion. Then I'll have all the pastries for the day ready for their finishing process, whether it be filling the Danishes, putting the icing on the morning buns, finishing with powdered sugar, cutting to size, whatever each pastry needs, but they'll all be fully baked and ready to go, with the exception of these guys that still need a few minutes in the oven to set the curd. So now I can kind of settle into this work for 10 minutes or so while the oven does its thing. So I need 1,200 grams of olives on top of this sourdough. I've got awesome olives, so I'm going to throw them all on top. And they're currently almost all intact, meaning they haven't really been crushed in any way, but we're going to balance it out a little. So before I go and fold them in, I'm just going to smash about half of them. And that way there'll be like a difference in texture in the final bread. Some parts of each piece will have, you know, a whole big chunk of olive, and then others will have these smaller, more manageable bits. I'm going to spread these inclusions on the top portion of this dough and do any final adjustments that I want to the olives themselves. So I'm smashing a few more. And I currently have a nice combination of smashed and whole olives, and I can start the actual process of incorporating the inclusions. The first bit is just sort of like a cat might need a rug. I'm pushing the inclusions into the dough, creating little pockets with my fingers as I go. With something like olives, there's also a moisture component. The olives are juicy, and so that's something that you got to factor when designing a formula. It needs to be a dough that can take a little bit more water, but only to a certain degree. Each dough only wants a certain amount of water, and there is kind of a finite point at which it becomes more soupy and more unmanageable. You can't shape it into a nice loaf of bread. This first part of the folding in should be done thoroughly, to the point that when you run your hand over the top, you're kind of getting a minimal amount. You're not pulling inclusions, they're rather staying in the dough. Now I can move on to phase 2, which is essentially like a lamination. We've taken and borrowed from like the croissant making techniques here, where we're going to fold this dough in half. So now think about that. I've got basically a sandwich. I've got dough, inclusions, dough. Now if I do this again, meaning fold it in half once again, I've just doubled my layers. I've got dough, inclusions, dough, inclusions, dough. And so this particular dough is going to get folded another 2 times through the stretch and fold process. Each time we're going to expand the amount of layers. And so by the end, by the time we go to shape the bread, it's great because the olives have been evenly distributed through the dough, but they aren't of the dough. That's sort of an important note. In the early days of proof, we did inclusion breads differently, and so we would like say throw all the ingredients in a bowl and mix them up. That's a different process altogether because the dough that you're forming includes those extras. And so then the dough itself is influenced more heavily by the extras that you're putting in. So consider something like cheddar that shreds in the mixer. It becomes like one with the dough and impacts the quality, in this case negatively. Whereas when you fold the inclusions in, you've already got your dough made, you've already got your gluten developed. It's already a beautiful sourdough, and now you're just basically layering in the extras, which become combined, but they're kind of sitting atop of already formed dough and within already formed dough, as opposed to becoming the dough itself. It's an important clarification. So I did a quick hand rinse, and now I'm moving on to a completely different bread. This is our seeded multigrain. So this is a 12-grain mix that we're putting in. It's got all kinds of things, from wheat berries to rye berries to millet to all, I mean, there's 12 grains in here. And so we've hydrated them overnight, so the grains have already softened. This is important for a number of reasons, mostly digestive. By soaking the grains, you're making them easier to digest in the final product. So we give them a nice extended soak and then do the same process of folding them into the bread. Now each inclusion is going to have some nuance to it. With grain mixes, I'm mostly concerned about them clumping together because this grain mix would have a tendency of like clumping, you know, kind of like a snowball throughout the entire stretch and fold process, of which we're just doing this first part, this first round of folding. We have to be careful to spread these grains out evenly and make sure to address any clumping that might be happening so that the final dough has evenly distributed multigrain. And what ends up happening is, as I'm folding into these pockets, grains fall into the divots and then clump in there. And so you just gotta be a little bit cognizant of what's happening with each dough as you do this. And as I create more layers and thin out the grain mix between more and more layers of dough, those pockets tend to reveal themselves by sort of beginning to rip the top layer of dough. So where I have too much grain mix, it will start to impact my dough as I fold it, and then I can address the grain mix. But so far, I'm getting nice clean folds. Whether we like it or not, we are still in the same marketplace as the giants, as the multi-billion-dollar companies. And so, of course, we make a premium product, we make it in a premium way, and so we charge more than, say, for, you know, the most basic industrialized bread. With that said, when the floor of your industry is set by multi-billion-dollar companies, you have to be competitive. And to be competitive, you have to achieve a certain amount of scale. And to achieve a certain amount of scale with an artisan process, you have to have a certain amount of hands and a certain amount of teamwork and collaboration. As leaders, we're also doing other things. We also have other responsibilities, and so we also have to weigh whether the responsibilities that are on our given plate for that day can be put aside, can be passed to the next day. And these are all elements that impact progress, that impact the speed of progress. This is the type of high performance that is at times necessary to achieve a goal. But those challenges are, you know, what it's all about in my mind.